Still on the topic of Russia-Ukraine war, but this is very much looking into more the media study. We walk through some of the Chinese media in Australia to see how those media report on different issues on Ukraine-Russian war. So good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thanks Double Think for organizing such a great event. I've been learning a lot on China in the past few days, yesterday and today. While I'm still on my jet lag, I almost fall asleep. It's not about the speakers, but it's arrived yesterday. Following Australian culture, before I start, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the traditional owner of the land where we gather today and pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm Lennon Chang. I'm currently a senior lecturer at Monash University, and I'm going to change my job very soon to another university. So if you got my business card, that's why I'm trying to use all of them. But well, otherwise they'll be wasted. So if you're going to contact me again in February next year, probably Google me first before you send me an email, or otherwise I can give you another Gmail that I'm using. And I wear another hat. I'm also a president of Australasian Taiwan Studies Association. The association was established in 2020 as a charitable non-for-profit organization in Australia to promote Taiwan studies and Taiwan democracy in Australia and neighborhood countries. So like recently we have organized a Taiwan update, a very first Taiwan update in Australia. We wouldn't be able to organize it because so-called update in Australia at ANU is normally a country update, and Taiwan is not a country according to Australian policy, so we will not be able to run a Taiwan update at ANU in Australia. But last year we started the update again. We started the update, and this year we run it at the Australian National University this couple of weeks ago. And we also organized the Bruce Jacobs Memorial Lecture, which will try to set up a Taiwan democracy series lecture in Australia, more like a regular annual talk. The reason I touch on this is that when we're talking about China in the world, we see Taiwan is, as you all know, sort of oppressed under this situation, and a lot of things we try to do was not able, or we won't be able to allowed. We are not allowed, we weren't able to do it because of the China influence. Now, moving into the topic today, I'm going to talk about some of the observations or research that my team has been doing in Australia on Chinese media reporting on Russia-Ukraine war. We have listened to quite a few of speakers today on how Western societies see China and the role of China in the Russia-Ukraine war, but we also some of the question was raised that we don't really know what the media or what the Chinese diaspora in different countries has been influenced. So this is a research we try. We were thinking to look into the Chinese diaspora in Australia and to really think about whether the Chinese media report, the Australian Chinese media have influence on the Chinese diaspora or Chinese-speaking groups in Australia in terms of Russia and Ukraine war, whether there are disinformation or misinformation disseminated through the Australian Chinese media. So we also want to explore whether these media are under the influence of foreign countries, i.e. China, and the focus today will briefly touch on the Chinese-speaking groups and diasporas I mentioned in Australia and how they are influenced by this media. And before I continue, I would like to thank my co-author, Dr. Isabel Liu. She was supposed to be here today, but she won't be able to make it. But she has done quite a bit of work into this to walk through the research. So also we are using Russia-Ukraine war as a case study. We're not really going to talk about the detail of the history or background of Russia and Ukraine war. I believe a lot of you would know better than I do in this area. But this is just a quick overview of the Russia-Ukraine war for your reference. But while Russia-Ukraine war is drawing attention of the world, what is Australians' response to Russia-Ukraine war, or whether Australian media really pay attention to this? My team, myself has observed that during those period of time, there are some domestic events that dominated the media reporting. Not only Australian media, but Australian Chinese media's reporting in that period of time. One of the big news that happens during the Russia-Ukraine war period of time is the largest flood in New South Wales. So there's more domestic issues that related to what Australians are paying really attention to. And the other issue that really interest Australians in what is happening in their neighborhood is the security agreement between China and Solomon Islands. So while some organization in Australia were asking me about doing a attitude of China in Australia, understanding the Chinese diaspora's attitude of China, or whether they're influenced by Chinese government. They all think about using Ukraine and Russian war as an example, but I tell them, well, why don't you just look into something that's happening in your neighborhood rather than following what other people are doing. This is one of the examples, because at that time, security agreement between China and Solomon Islands are dominating the media as well. A lot of emphasis are putting into whether Australia need to get involved in it, or what Australian government can do to protect their neighborhood or their backyard. Another big issue event that happens during the same time is the federal election that happens in May 2022. That actually dominated the media as well. So because of all these things, we don't really see Russia-Ukraine wars are drawing media attention by Australian media and by the Chinese media in Australia. Although the Russian-Ukraine war did not draw deserved attention by Australian media, we can see that Australian government are paying great attention to this and have taken actions to against Russia. One of the examples here is after the war was launched, Australian government asked social media like Twitter, Facebook, and Google to stop sharing news and information published by Russian government-owned media. This is to prevent the dissemination of fake news and disinformation in Australia. On the other hand, news media like Spatial Broadcast Service, a main news company and multicultural and multilingual broadcaster in Australia, as well as Foxtel, suspended the broadcasting of Russian Today, NTV Moscow, and RT channel. So SBS was set up to more in order to promote multicultural in Australia. So what they do is that they will show news from different countries. Like they have the Chinese news. They also have the Russian news. But during those back in the time when Russia-Ukraine war was on, they have asked SBS to stop broadcasting the Russian Today on their channel. And where am I now? Sorry, I'm still under my jet lag at the moment. So Australia also continued the sanction. Well, jet lag is a good excuse to use. Well, this kind of situation happens, eh? Australian government also continued the sanction that they imposed since 2014 and has imposed more sanctions in 2022, including financial sanctions and travel bans on a further of 110 individuals in response to the Russian illegal war against Ukraine. So here are some examples on the sanctions that Australian government are putting on. And Maris Penn was the foreign minister at the time, and she was she speak quite strongly against Ukraine-Russian war at the time. So okay, after this kind of background on the Australian responses to Russia-Ukraine war, let's move on to discuss how Australian Chinese media report on Russian Ukraine war, and whether there were any dissemination of disinformation or fake news during those period of time. So this is a brief history of the development of Australia's Chinese media. It can be roughly divided into 4 stages. As you can see, the first period of time is gold rush. There's a lot of Chinese to start to move into Australia for the gold rush. At that time, the media was launched. The Chinese media was launched in order to provide information or industry policies or even commercial aids to those people who are in the Chinese-speaking people in Australia. The second period of time, the second stage is White Australian period. A lot of Chinese left Australia because of White Australian policy. At the time, the Chinese media researchers observed is declining. While the post-Australian period of time, more Chinese move back, and we see a flourish of Chinese media in those period of time. And those Chinese media are actually run by people from Hong Kong, Taiwan, or in Indonesia, and they got a lot of criticisms towards Chinese politics, and they actually recruit their own journalists in those period of time to do interviews, to write up the news. Obviously, I was very tired yesterday when I doing this PowerPoint. I don't know why that's a December after era. The last one is the digital era. That's very much the time we are now, and we see a lot of news media reported on social media, not only on print or radios. And we also see an increase of international students or Chinese migrants try to create media to do their self-media through their channels. And some of the students in Australia are actually running some websites or even what we call public accounts on Weixin to report on the Chinese news. And these are the media we're going to talk about today. We actually picked 4 quite popular Chinese media. The media that publish in Chinese in Australia. So we walk through the post of this media during the period of Ukraine war. It's around February to June. And also here are some backgrounds of those medias, just for your reference. All right. So we'll look into how those media report on different news. We see while we walk through this kind of the news, we can see outlets like Daily Chinese Herald and Media Today tend to share the posts directly without rewriting them. So what they do is that they share a lot of posts from other media, like we'll show you later, like even China Times, LTN, New York Times, Chinese, SBS, ABC, Mandarin. So they didn't re-edit or rewrite it. They just retweet or repost them. The other one we see, the other type of media reporting is they do a translation and editing the news themselves. So this include Australian, Chinese Daily, and Melbourne Today. And Melbourne Today is quite different to the other media. It's a Weixin public account, so they have very limited word account, and I think they can only publish 5 or 7 news a day. So they are being very selective in terms of the news they publish. So like. Take Media Today, the 今日墨尔本, for example, we can see that from the website, their news were directly reposted, and the sources are quite broad. The sources that they're reposting are actually quite broad. They include Deutsche Welle, BBC News, New York Times, Chinese version, for etc., etc. And for the Melbourne Today, we can see that they also do similar things, and they do direct reposting as well. But for like the 微信公众号one, you'll see that they'll try to write up the news themselves and use different sources to do a reporting. So now for the reposting of the Russian-Ukraine war, we see in the Daily Chinese Herald, we've selected the most relative 50 news to analyze. We see both Daily Chinese Herald and Mediated reposted widely Russia-Ukraine war related to other news outlets all over the world. We did not see a trend that they have any stand on the news reposted, and because of the wide source that they reposted, it might be very hard for us to really to do a discourse analysis or content analysis to see whether there are influence of foreign countries in their media reporting. And where am I now? No. I'm totally lost. Wait, how can I go back? Okay. Sorry, I'm really totally lost. Yeah, we're here. So let's take Daily Chinese Herald, for example. Although it's established by non-Chinese, well, it's actually published by, it's launched by Taiwanese at the post-white Australian period. It has, according to the research in Australia, shifted its stand to attract more readers from Chinese immigrants. And I actually have another PowerPoint which I deleted here. It shows the publisher, and I actually have a complaint from the publisher after I do this presentation on the other event, and I'm trying to contact him to really understand why a researcher in Australia mentioned that the Daily Chinese Herald has been very close to China and published a lot of what we say pro-China context. Maybe Matteo can mention can say something about it later after the presentation, as he was the one who used to publish on that. And for the Australian Chinese Daily and Melbourne Today, this one. Two news outlets which both edit and publish their own posts. We see these two outlets are quite different in reposting Russia-Ukraine war. We can see that from the table, the Australian Chinese Daily report more from the perspective of Ukraine, and similar percentage from Russia and international perspectives. And Melbourne Today, on the other hand, did not really reposting directly about the war. Instead, what they do is they report more on economic related news with a focus on the issue that might have impact towards the life of migrants in Australia. So we see a trend that they use this link to promote for more advertisement or more promotion, or more to attract more advertisement in order to generate profit. During our research, we felt that Australian Chinese Daily, which used to help lobby the Australian government to give Chinese students PR during the Tiananmen Square protest, still tend to use traditional Chinese in their reposting and tend to be more cautious in citing Russian news. All right, to sum up, I'm in a good time. We see an overlapping of Russia-Ukraine war with the flooding and federal election in Australia. The war was not be able to dominate the news reporting, or I should say, it's not really draw. It's the attention that it needs to be drawn in Australia. And after analyzing for Chinese media in Australia, we see that there are not many reports on Russia or China's spreading of misinformation or disinformation through the media outlets, such as the Color Revolution, the US is backing up the war, etc., etc. It's actually quite surprising. But we do see that on Weixin public account, there's more influence from China, and they also cite the media that we think that's credible. As we can see, the numbers of audiences of these 4 media outlets are not really big, and most of the Chinese-speaking people will tend to get their information now from social media and short videos like TikTok or YouTube. There's a need, if we are going to do future research, to look into different social media, its influence towards the Chinese diaspora in Australia. It is also important not to make any suggestions or recommendations through the content analysis or discourse analysis, whether a media is influenced by a region, country or not. So the reason why we really, the message we want to give out from here, and also the reason why we want to do this research, is that we do see that discourse analysis or content analysis might not be enough to really understand whether the media is influenced by foreign countries or not. You need to really look into the culture, the history thing, like what we just mentioned about the Chinese hero. Although they didn't really post on different, they didn't post based on what the Chinese government want to see, but we do see the Chinese government trying to involve and try to talk to the editors in order to draw their attention. So all in all, based on the research, we cannot really say that there is or isn't foreign influence on Chinese media in Australia. But when I say Chinese media here, is the ones we look into. We didn't really look into the new ones like SBS Mandarin or ABC Mandarin. But we have to be very careful that the state-sponsored disinformation campaign might not be in the format of state-sponsors, but co-production. So they might not show, they might not active in asking those media to report anything that's pro-China now, but on the other hand, they will do something on the road. And we need to be wary that this media is being used as a platform during emergency time. I mentioned they might not report on China over a period of time, but when needed, the Chinese government might or foreign countries might be able to get involved and ask them to say something that is more pro their own country. We already see, for example, some of the platforms post a lot of jokes or short videos. They are not really political, but sometimes you see a message pop up that is related to politics. So for this kind of tactics, which I call it a small critics, might generate more big helps when needed, especially during the time when there's an election. And we were talking about this in the morning, that we see this kind of things to really help pop up during a certain period of time. And in response to what I was just saying, while we're looking into discourse analysis and content analysis, we need to be, in the future research, our team suggests that rather than just do a content analysis, it's more important that we really talk to the community, do a participatory research, and collaborate with the public and private to understand the real impact or the methods of dissemination of the disinformation. And just put a note here, while we're doing all this kind of disinformation and misinformation research, we need to be very careful not to witch hunt or over-regulate media freedom or freedom of speech. So I know it's easy to say, but how we can, it's important that we try to think about some innovative ways to balance these two parts, not to over-regulate the media in order to to combat disinformation. I'll stop it here. Happy to. Do you still have time to take questions? Okay, we're happy to take questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Philip Nubel with Global Voices. I did some research this year on independent Sinophone voices, especially TikTokers, YouTubers, bloggers. I was in a team. I was working more on Europe and Korea, but I know about Sydney Daddy in Australia and all this kind of, also very not so easy to cut debates, even among those YouTubers and influencers. And I was curious if you know, for example, how he was covering or not covering or mentioning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also, where perhaps the reactions in the comments, or did, he engage in discussions with other influencers? Thank you.
I know the account, but I also haven't got a chance to really look into TikTok or YouTube yet, and that's what we're suggesting that we might need to do in the future. So this one is still looking into more on the print ones that people can get, and the reason why we think it's important to start from there is these are the traditional ones that influence the old diaspora groups who has what we call less digital literacy. Yeah, but we'll definitely look into the area that you mentioned in the future.
Thanks for the talk. Ben from Westminster Foundation for Democracy. I wanted to ask to what extent the diaspora publications within Australia take political positions within Australian domestic politics.
Well, interestingly, we see most of the diaspora have their own stand already in terms of domestic politics. In terms of when we talk about the federal elections, they tend to be more, in my group, tend to be more liberal rather than ever. And one of the reasons is that liberal is more supporting, supporting Taiwan, or trying to create this kind of a debate in Australia, but Labour tend to be more focusing on domestic affairs and really try to build up a good economy within the country. But in other part of the domestic affairs, I think they're more cautious. They're more paying attention to what is happening to their neighborhood, not really into the international world affairs, and that's why we don't really see a lot of reporting in terms of international affairs in those Chinese media. Does that answer your question? I think we are running out of time, so I'll pass the microphone to next speaker. Thank you.